So today we're going to be talking about rejection and loss, which is unfortunately part of the writing process. It's just going to happen to you at least once, if not many, many, many times. Just to put it in perspective, I know you've probably heard of a bunch of different stories like this before, but just because a few of these surprised me and I hadn't heard of them, I thought I'd share some unique ones with you. Stephen King, guys have probably heard of him, known as the King of Horror, pun not intended. He is considered one of the best horror writers of our time, and yet when it came to trying to get his first novel published, which eventually became a movie because it was so critically acclaimed and good, was rejected by 30 different publishers before he finally found a person who was willing to publish it. And before that, he tried to publish short stories when he was a teenager and a young adult. And he literally had a nail in his wall where he put all of his rejection letters, and he said he had to buy a bigger nail. That tells you how many times he got rejected. And this is the king of horror, right? The person who everyone looks up to is like, if I want to write horror, I want to be Stephen King, you know? And then you have authors that you might be familiar with, like Jessica Day George. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's fantastic. If you haven't, you should look at her books. They're fantastic. She was rejected 200 times before her first book was published. Insane. And now she's a New York Times bestseller. Then you also have Brandon Sanderson, he lost count of how many rejections he had because he just kept giving up on novels if they got a certain amount of rejections. And so as a result, he wrote 13 novels before finally his 14th novel was the one that got him published. That's insane. And again, this is Brandon Sanderson. This is someone that everyone's like, he's the best, he's amazing. And yet, clearly, he faced some serious rejection. And then last but certainly not least, the one that I wanted to mention was Hunger Games. Literally, critically acclaimed. Everything that she writes, everyone's like, dude, I want to read that now. She's coming out with yet another Hunger Games themed thing because people love it so freaking much. And yet, it was rejected 60 times before it was finally published. So, what can we take away from this? Rejection is part of the writing process. Rejection and loss. And I mention loss because obviously the writers who wrote these things probably entered into a lot of writing contests as well, but most people don't keep track of writing contests. But you're kind of in the phase where that's probably where you're at, right? Because you're keeping more track of winning or losing contests than you are of publishing. Maybe some of you guys are trying to get published, and it's so good for you. Fantastic. Please talk to me. I would love to encourage that. But it's also a really hard time because you're mostly facing, like I said, rejection and loss, and that's hard. Yes, you've won probably a couple things or gotten a couple things, but you win as much as you lose, really. I think a lot of people experience that in writing. Um, it's very, very rare to just completely and utterly blow it out of the gate, win all the time. Almost never happens. And typically, if that does happen, it's because you've worked your tail off in order to get there. And so, as a result, realize that failure is not a reason to quit. It's a way to learn. It's just part of the process, like I said. And sometimes it's just about also realizing other things you can learn from it. So, what can we learn from these seemingly, try fail cycles? Um, Perhaps the publisher isn't for you. Doesn't mean that you are a bad writer. Perhaps this story just isn't for them. One of the things Jessica Day George mentioned was the fact that she kept trying to write for young adults. She was like, I'm going to write a young adult novel. And young adult was just not her genre. She finally tried writing a middle grade novel, and boom, it worked. And so sometimes it's about finding your niche, finding your genre, finding the right story, like Brandon Sanderson. He was like, look, these 13 novels, I want to get them published. Not going to happen though, so let's keep trying. And so maybe it's just not the right novel, maybe it's not the right time, maybe it's not the right publisher. There's a lot of things that it might not be about your writing. Now, can it be about your writing? Sure. Can we all find ways to learn and improve? Absolutely. But it's not always about you or your writing being bad. It's sometimes just about the publisher. There's been a lot of times where that can be the case. For example, there's such thing as different opinions. I know there have been several contests that I've run where I'm like, this one's totally going to get first place. And it gets like second because my colleagues disagreed with me. Or it gets like third because my colleagues are like, hey, not my favorite. Whereas I absolutely am like, first place material. And so different opinions can get you in different placings or different or cause you to go lower in the status. Or alternatively, if you're looking at publishers, sometimes it can be differences of opinion of quality as well. I know that when I was working for Monster Ivy Publishing, there was a novel that we were hoping to publish, and I was reading it going like, I love this so much. And it's like, yeah, it has some world building flaws, yeah, it has some character building flaws, but like it has so much potential. And there was another novel that I was like, meh, it's okay. Not my favorite. It's just okay. And yet we ended up taking that one and not taking the other one because they were like, the other one, even though it's just kind of has less problems with it. So we're going to have to do less editing and it's going to take less work. So we're going to take that one. And that made me so sad because, in my opinion, I felt the other one was so much better. It just had a lot of flaws that need to be polished. And so sometimes it's not necessarily about you, sometimes it's about opinions. There's other things that you need to take into account too. There's a difference between a hard rejection, a soft rejection, and when it comes to contests, there's a difference between participation prize and honorable mention. When it comes to honorable mention, that's kind of more like a soft rejection, where it's like, hey, you didn't make it into the top three, but you came really close. And that's the same thing with publishing. If you like came pretty dang close, then they give you what's called a soft rejection, like the one that I just mentioned, where I absolutely loved it, but the rest of my colleagues were like, it might be too much work. Um, we gave them a soft rejection, which was basically saying, like, hey, we love your concept, we love the idea, but it needs a lot more polishing and work with character and plot development before we'd be able to consider it. Um, and so, if you want, good luck publishing elsewhere, and maybe give that a quick polish before you try again. And that was a soft rejection. Why is it important to keep track of soft rejections versus hard rejections? Because it can give you an idea of where you should be, what your target is. Sometimes you might be submitting to publishers that aren't quite right for you. And so if you're getting a ton of soft rejections from middle grade publishers, or you're getting hard rejections from YA publishers, maybe you should do more middle grade. Look into that kind of stuff. Take that into account. Maybe it's just a sign that you're moving in the wrong direction and you need to change course. Another thing is, as I mentioned with the one guy before, look at your work and consider how it can be polished. This is why, for the contests that I do, I give you feedback. Because even if you get first, second, third, honorable mention, I feel that it is worthy of noting how you can get better. Because even if you get accepted, that does not mean that it's perfect. Just like with publishing, there's a lot of people that are like, ah, I got a acceptance letter, I'm all good. No, they're still going to ask you to edit things. Every time that I have been accepted for publishing a short story, they have asked me to re-edit the short story. So yes, I was the best one that they wanted to publish, but that does not mean it's perfect. Still has its issues, still needs to be polished, still needs could be better. Um, with looking at things to polish, you also need to take into account, though, once again, opinions. Another great example of this is with there was an author, can't remember their name. I think it might have been Jessica Day George, but I'm not certain. I don't quote me on that. Who mentioned that they had written a novel where in the end the person gets married, right? And so they were all like pushing for you should have makeout scenes and you should have be a little more spicy. And she was like, I don't want to do that. And they were like, well, then we're not going to publish you. And she said, okay, I won't do that. And so also know when you want to draw hard lines. And it's okay to draw hard lines. Lord of the Rings was very similar, where he said, if you publish Lord of the Rings, you have to publish The Silmarillion. And that got him a lot of rejections. A lot of people were like, the Silmarillion, that's basically just world building info dump. I'm not taking that. And then they tell him, like, I promise, if you weren't going to do the Silmarillion, I'd take your book. And he's like, well, I want you to publish the Silmarillion. So no. So part of it's also knowing when to draw your lines. Sometimes people are going to try and force you to push your boundaries or change things or be like, make this character a dragon or something. And you're like, I don't want them to be a dragon. And that's okay. Realize that they are not the right publisher for you. Don't feel like you have to change everything about yourself. Now, if they are saying, like, hey, this doesn't make sense and there's a huge plot hole here, that might be something you want to consider and want to look at more in depth. But if they're just saying, like, hey, we want you to change this because, in our opinion, it would make it better, and it's something very superficial, like changing someone's race or changing someone's background, or like with the one lady changing how much spice is in your novel, that's up to you. That's not up to them. Now, if you think that you agree with them, then sure, go ahead and change it. But if you disagree with them, don't go with them. You'll find a publisher who will take your novel as it is and not force you to change things. Now, will they force you to change some things? Yes, but generally they should be forcing you to change good things. Like I said, plot hole problems, character inconsistency, world building flaws. These are the types of things that people should be asking you to change. If they're asking you to change things that are fundamentally part of how you write your books, then they probably aren't for you, and that's okay. I I would say it's better to be rejected on the premise that they don't like your story the way it is than it is to force yourself to fit their mold. All right. Next thing, revise and resubmit letters. Now, if you go to try and get published, you might notice that you have some revise and resubmit letters. This means that you were so close to being accepted. So close that if you revise it, they might reconsider it. And I do say might because there's been a few people who have gotten revise and resubmit letters that have even sent it to me as a professional editor, and I've helped them revise it, and they still were like, we're still not feeling it. But if you at least get a revise and resubmit letter, that means you have a shot, you have a chance. You seriously want to at least give it your best shot. And if they still say no, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. Part of it is also just, like I said, finding that right fit. And sometimes people say revise and resubmit and we'll consider it. And then they get a new team or something else, or they change topics, or they're like, hey, we're no longer publishing middle grade. Lots of things can change between the time that they give you a revise and resubmit letter and you resubmitting it. Keep in mind, if you resubmit it and do get rejected, that doesn't mean your story's bad. That just means that they saw it had a ton of potential, but it's maybe just not for them. And that's okay. Again, you want to find someone that your book and this publisher, you are a match made in heaven. You don't want to be finding a I guess I'll accept it match. Kind of think of it like your future partner. You don't want to marry someone who you're like, I guess you're okay. Like, that's a terrible idea, right? You're not going to be very happy if you're just like, nah, they're okay. And you want to do the same thing with your publisher. Ultimately, your publisher will be in some ways, like a life partner. This is your partner for the rest of your publishing journey. So it's important that you pick someone that is going to do right by you and is going to treat you well and is going to like you for you and that you're going to like them for them. So it's important that not only you like them, but that they like you and that there's no compromises being made. Yes, you sometimes need to make compromises in relationships, just like in publishing partnerships. Absolutely. But if you're making too many compromises, you might as well be trodden over, and that's not good either. It's important that you take into account what you need, and your needs are important as a writer, especially because, like I said, this is in some ways where you are. And sure, can you find another publisher? Yeah. Typically, it's harder though once you've already been published under another company. So I'd recommend doing that before. um, but you can switch publishers. I know there was one lady, Jennifer Jenkins. She wrote a series called Nameless, and she originally was under a different publisher, and that publisher was swindling her out of money. And so she bought her rights back through a very intense legal battle. Another reason why you should be careful about who you publish under. And after she bought her rights back, she self published it and republished it, so it's now back out there. And then she found a new traditional publisher for the rest of her books because she honestly found that doing the self publishing thing, even though she could make it work, it is very hard. Speaking of which, self publishing is very hard. You will also face rejection there because you will have some people that will be like, meh, my book isn't for you. My book isn't for me. Or for whatever reason, like, I don't like the way that you write romance. And you're like, well, other people do. So you got to realize there's opinions too, right? There have been books that I have loved that other people are just like, meh. And then there have been other books that I absolutely am like, I hate this book. That just has like critically acclaimed reviews on the back, right? And people are like, I love this book. I can't put it down. And I'm like, I did. I put it down with much prejudice and said, no, I hate it. And so rejection is in some ways just part of the writing process, as I keep saying. It's important that you realize it's not about you or your writing. It doesn't mean your writing sucks just because you get rejected, just because you don't win a contest, just because some random reader says, I don't like the way you write romance or whatever. That doesn't mean you're a bad writer. It doesn't. Honestly, I think that's the thing that I hope sinks in the most from today's lesson. It doesn't make you a bad writer just because you are rejected or lose or have someone who doesn't like your writing. That does not make you a bad writer. What makes you a bad writer is if you quit and give up. So don't give up. Don't give up because you guys all have an incredible amount of potential. And if you keep trying, you will get better. You will. It's just part of the process. Try and failing. Think about it like all of our greatest book heroes, right? Percy Jackson, how many times has he screwed up royally and then had to fix it, right? But does that make him a bad hero? Absolutely not. We still love the dork. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to go, oh my gosh, you totally messed that up, Percy. But that doesn't also mean that we can't be like, woo, you did it when he finally succeeds. It's important that we realize that failure doesn't make us bad at doing something. It's just part of learning and part of the process. And in some ways, if we're afraid of failure and give up, that's what truly makes it so it doesn't work anymore. All right, last thing. If you are trying to get published traditionally, you may be rejected not because of your writing, but because of your query letter. Query letters are the first thing people read, and if they don't like the query letter, they don't even bother reading the book. They go and toss. And so it may not even be about your writing. You may be sitting here being like, I got 40 rejections and clearly it's about my book. It might just be because your query letter is awful. And query letters are hard, let me tell you right now. As someone who helps edit query letters are freaking hard, man. So realize that maybe you need to relook at your query letter and give that a polish. Maybe you need to reconsider what you're putting in your query letter. Maybe it's too long, maybe it's too short. There's all sorts of things that can get you rejected that aren't about you and your writing. And even if it is about you and your writing, like I said, you want to find someone who accepts you for you as a writer. So it's important that you keep trying because there will be that person out there. And I know it might seem impossible, but there is a person out there who's just sitting there at their desk being like, oh, I'm kind of bored today. And you send them your thing, and maybe it's the thing that lights up their day and makes their week. You don't know until you see it. You don't know until you try it. And sure, it's going to be a long, hard journey getting there, as is obvious by the fact that several very famous authors have struggled immensely trying to get published. But that doesn't mean their stories were bad. For example, Hunger Games got rejected 60 times. Does that mean that Hunger Games sucks and is terrible? Clearly not. Or she wouldn't keep writing about Hunger Games and making movies. It wouldn't keep happening if it wasn't good. Same thing with Stephen King. Does that mean his book Carrie sucked? No. In fact, it was so good that people are literally, like I said, calling him the king of horror. And they wouldn't do that unless they really meant it. Jessica Day George, like I said, New York Times bestseller. You don't get there unless you've done some seriously good writing. It's important to look at those kinds of things and realize that, like I said, rejection and loss is part of the process, but that does not make you a bad writer. So please keep trying, keep submitting. Don't give up. Don't feel discouraged. All right, as per usual, are there any questions you have about getting published or contests or learning from rejection and loss? I'll give you a second to think. Yeah. Excellent question. I have a whole lesson on query letters, but I can always do another one. To give a basic summary to answer your question right now, A query letter includes a lot of things. It introduces yourself, your book, and then introduces basically why you think they should publish your book. So, kind of how it goes is something like this. I'm going to make up one on the spot. So, by no means copy this exactly, but um, hi, my name is Cheyenne Nielsen, and I would like to query my book, Riding the Storm. It's a young adult fiction about two teenagers trying to survive a apocalypse outrunning a drastic hurricane or something like that. So it gives you kind of a summary of the book, but it also tells you what age range it's for. It also tells you a little bit about what it's about. I missed this, but it typically also tells you the word count estimate to the nearest thousandth. So, like if it's 86,950 words, you're going to want to round up to 87,000 words. Um, and different things like that. The reason why is because it's kind of like a first date. Really, publishing is like finding a life partner, funnily enough. It really is. It's like going on a first date. You wouldn't go up at a first date and be like, hi, you want to get married? Like, no, don't do that. So you don't want to come off too intense in your query letter and be like, publish me. But you also want to be like, hey, let's get to know each other. Kind of like you would on an actual first date. Be like, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite food? You know, that kind of stuff. But with a novel. So you say like, hey, this is who I am. This is, and I'd really like to get to know more about you and your publishing company. Or alternatively, you can do the thing that most internet people do nowadays and give them a quick Google and be like, I noticed that you publish things like X, Y, and Z, so I thought you might be interested in my stuff. Because it's of a similar caliber and of a similar theme. Um, so think of it as a way of introducing you and your book to your potential life publisher. Hopefully, if everything goes well, you want to find the person who you want to stick with your entire time. Most people find their publisher, and that's the person they live and die with as a publisher. So you kind of want to, like I said, put your best foot forward, introduce yourself in your book, and make sure that they really have a chance to get to know you. Um, Most query letters are typically 200 words or less when it comes to the description of your book. So you want to make sure that you have a very brief introduction. Like I said, my book is called Riding the Storm. It's a young adult fantasy novel, and it's about 87,000 words. And here's what it's about. Give them a little 200 words or less summary. And then at the end, if you have anything super important that you need to talk about yourself, that's when you do that. At the very end, you say, I won the Writers of the Future contest once, which I haven't, but that would be awesome with my query letter, because that's a very prestigious national contest. But you say like, hey, I won X, Y, and Z contest before, or alternatively, you can say if it's the library contest, you could say I've won about four. I've placed in the top three in four contests of various writing caliber in my state. Um, and or you can say something like if you have an English degree like me, you can say I have a degree in creative writing from UVU. In general, label your writing credentials or alternatively label other credentials. For example, if your book is about, science fiction about plants eating people, you could be like, I have a degree in botany. So this could be real. um, so you want to list any relevant information. And I do say relevant because, for example, I had someone send me a query letter once, and it was like, I love wearing funny hats. I was like, cool detail about you. Not relevant. We don't need to know you like wearing funny hats. Even if the main character likes wearing funny hats, we don't need to know that. Any other questions about publishing, contests, getting through rejection? Highly recommend. Sometimes it's good to just eat some ice cream and chill. Um, every time I get rejected, I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna chill for today. Gonna take a break. It's hard. I'm not saying it shouldn't be hard. I'm just saying don't give up. So, any other questions about publishing, contests, or getting rejected? How to cope? No. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming today, and I'm going to turn off the video now. You can always ask questions afterwards about other things if you would like. Um, Please remember that we have a contest coming up as of March 1st, which is this Saturday. We will finally have those physically out, although I have been sending them to you via email for a while if you're signed up for the email, so yay. Um, but for those of you not signed up for the Writers Club email, mainly those who are on the video, come to the American Fork Library upstairs information desk and we will have copies of that. They aren't due until the end of May, I believe, is when we're going to do that. Could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's the end of May. um, it's going to be very exciting. I'm very excited for it. The concept is that you have a character that comes across a mysterious waterfall, and the story has to be fantasy. So as long as it's fantasy, you have a mysterious waterfall, you're good. Otherwise, you can do anything you'd like. Hi, you're here for the Writers Club? Um, if you're not here for the Writers Club is in here today. If you're looking for something else, ask the person at the front desk. All right. Um, all right, I'm going to turn the video off now. If you have any questions or suggestions about lessons I can do, please also ask or suggest. Same thing goes for the people on the video. Feel free to comment below if you have a suggestion of a lesson that I should give.